In 1979, a clinical psychologist published research on a technique that was not discovered in a laboratory. It was named by the man who invented it. Margaret Singer worked out of the University of California, Berkeley. Over 2 decades, she interviewed more than 3,000 people who had left high-control religious groups. What she found, threaded through nearly every account, was a pattern so consistent it had the quality of a script. The technique had a name because someone had chosen to name it. Sun Myung Moon, founder of the Unification Church, called it love bombing. He used that phrase to describe exactly what his organization was doing. The deliberate, sustained flooding of a new recruit with warmth, physical touch, eye contact, and undivided attention. It was not incidental kindness. It was doctrine. Singer's research documented what this looked like in practice. At the Boonville facility in Northern California, a Unification Church recruitment camp operating through the 1970s, new contacts were never left alone. Not physically, not emotionally. Journalist Robert Boettcher, who investigated the church extensively during that period, documented that members were trained to maintain continuous proximity to recruits during the first 72 hours of contact. Someone was always there. A hand on the shoulder. A laugh timed to yours. Eyes that held yours a beat longer than felt normal. The recruit was, in the most literal sense, never without a witness to their own mood. The physical architecture of this mattered. Boonville was rural, hours from urban centers. The schedule was full. Meals were communal and loud and warm. Evenings ended with group singing. There was no pocket of silence in which a doubt could form and hold its shape. Singer described this environment not as chaotic, but as precisely managed, a controlled atmosphere engineered to produce a specific emotional state in a specific window of time. That window was narrow, and it was the first phase of something longer. Singer documented a consistent timeline across multiple organizations. The Unification Church, the People's Temple, the Divine Light Mission. In each case, the shift from intensive affection to sleep deprivation and dietary restriction occurred within 8 to 14 days of initial contact. The warmth did not end abruptly. It was rationed, withdrawn incrementally, in sync with the introduction of doctrine and the narrowing of social contact with outsiders. By the time the recruit noticed the change in temperature, the external reference points were already gone. Singer's term for this transition phase was clinical and precise. She did not use the word manipulation in her early papers. She described what happened to the body and let the reader make the inference. This is the point at which the record becomes interesting in a different way. In 1987, Singer sought to present expert witness testimony in legal cases involving cult recruitment and undue influence. The American Psychological Association reviewed her proposed framework. They ruled against her. The finding was that cult influence theory had not met the Frye standard, the threshold of general scientific acceptance required for expert testimony in federal court. It was a methodological objection, not a factual one. Singer's interviews, her documented cases, her cross-organizational timeline, none of that was disputed. The APA's position was that the theoretical framework built on top of that data had not been sufficiently tested. The practical consequence was immediate. Hundreds of ongoing court cases involving cult recruitment lost access to the only clinical framework that existed to describe what had happened to the plaintiffs. Families who had spent years trying to understand what had occurred to their relatives found themselves in courtrooms where the experience could not be formally named. Singer continued her research and her testimony in other jurisdictions. But the 1987 ruling created a gap in the legal record that closed off certain avenues entirely. Files on those cases sit in federal archives. Most were never reopened. Singer died in 23. The term she had formalized entered popular psychology slowly and then very quickly. By the 2010s, love bombing appeared in mainstream therapeutic literature as a recognized pattern in intimate partner abuse. It was discussed in clinical training programs. It appeared in diagnostic frameworks for coercive control. The lineage was almost never traced. Therapists used the term without knowing its origin. Clients heard it and found it clarifying. The word did its work regardless of where it came from. What that origin reveals is uncomfortable in a specific way. The term was not coined by someone studying harm from the outside. It was coined by the person designing the protocol. Moon named it because he needed a name for it. An internal vocabulary for a practice his organization was systematizing and teaching. The fact that the name eventually migrated into clinical use to describe the damage the practice caused is a strange kind of loop. The tool named itself, and the name stuck because it was accurate. Singer's 3,000 interviews contain a detail that surfaces repeatedly in accounts from former Unification church members in particular. Many described the early days at Boonville not as frightening, but as the warmest they had ever felt. Seen, held, attended to. Several described it as feeling like love. They used that word voluntarily without prompting when asked to characterize the experience. Singer noted this in her research without editorial comment. She recorded what her subjects said. The warmth was real. The attention was real. The hands on the shoulder, the sustained eye contact, the laughter, all of it was real. The question her research left open, and which the 1987 APA ruling arguably allowed to remain open, was whether the reality of a feeling has any bearing on the intent behind the conditions that produced it. Decades later, a single sentence in a 23 review of Singer's work noted that her documented 8 to 14-day transition timeline had never been formally replicated in a controlled study. It had also never been disproven.